The Secret of Mental Magic. Lesson 5. The Science of Telementation. The universal mentative energy. The mentative currents. The conversion of energy. The nature of mental states. Vibrational excitement. How vibrations are transmitted. Currents and waves. The law of wave motion. Experimental proof. Mentative waves and currents. Important principles. A mental picture. The sea of energy. The formation of currents. The essence of energy. The degrees of power. The centers in action. Rotary currents. A great moving picture. The second plane. The second and third planes. The 4 higher planes. Second plane sights. Tinted thought clouds. Emotional colors. The meaning of blue, yellow, orange, brown, red, green, gray, and black thought colors. Desire and will appearances. Vitality vibrations. The human aura. How people affect each other. Suggestions in Action A, positive exhibition. Willpower lightning. Desire force induction. A combined attack. Charming, alluring attraction. Repelling attacks. The force in churches, theaters, etc. Mental atmosphere of towns and places. Unlucky and haunted places. Positive atmospheres. The various appearances of thought forms. The mentative wire. Rotary forms. Thought forms like living forces. Telementation explained. Long-range influence. White magic and black. The mental image. The evil effects of fear. Adverse treatments. How to neutralize them. Black magicians in disguise. The secret of charms. How witchcraft operated. Startling examples. Good employment of the force. How schemers use it. Valuable rules for self-protection. Illustrative examples. Generalized telementation. How strong positive men use the force. How to repel the waves. The law of attraction. Illustrations of the law. The key of telementation. Visualization and the laws and principles of its operation. Full directions. A caution. The working principles explained fully. Concluding advice. The science of telementation. You will see by reference to Lesson 2 that the term telementation is used by me in the sense of mentative influence at a distance, the word being derived from the Greek word tele, meaning afar off, the word mentation, which I use in the sense of mental activity. The term of the subject. You will also remember that the word mentation implies activity of the mentative energy, which I hold to be universal in its character. You will also remember that the action of telementation depends upon the production of induced mental states by mentative currents in and of the mentative energy. Mentative induction, you remember, operates along the same lines as magnetic or electrical induction in physical science. That is, an original mental state, being an exhibition of mentative energy, may reproduce itself in another mind by mentative induction, operating by means of mentative currents. Technical terms necessary. I've explained how mental states may be induced by suggestion as well as by mentative currents, and shall not allude to this phase at this place, but shall consider mentative induction in its phase of manifestation by means of mentative currents. This mention of technical terms may seem somewhat dry to you, but you should acquaint yourselves with the intelligent use and meaning of the terms, for thereby you will be enabled to hold the ideas firmly in your mind. Terms are pegs upon which you may hang thoughts and ideas, so that you may find them when you need them. Otherwise, they are scattered around in confusion. The universal mentative energy. In order that you may fully understand the wonderful phenomena of telementation, I think we had better take another look at the fundamental principle, or mentative energy itself. By understanding the nature of the force employed, you may better understand its effects and laws of operation. You will remember that I have postulated, claimed, and assumed the existence of an universal mentative energy or force, which is immanent in and manifested in all forms of life, energy, and mind. I have also held that all personal manifestations of mind in ourselves and others are but centers of mentative energy in the great ocean of the universal mentative energy. You will also remember that I have claimed that the brain was not a creator of mentative energy, but rather in the nature of a converter or transformer of the universal mentative energy into usable forms and phases. Well, so far we understand the matter. Now, let us pass on to the consideration of the mentative currents. Mentative currents. Well, in the first place, the currents must be set into motion somewhere and somehow. Where and how? Let us see. Well, we must see that the mentative currents have their origin, or rather, their initial impulse, in and from the mind of some individual. How? Well, in and from his brain, of course. Why? Well, the brain is the transformer or converter of mentative energy into usable shapes and phases. What is the nature of the brain's action? Well, science, as well as occult teachings, inform us that in all brain processes there is a burning up of brain substance and nervous matter, just as there is a corresponding burning up of the elements in an electric battery. The process is very similar in both cases. The conversion of energy. Both brain and battery convert or transform an energy already existing in an universal form, which energy cannot be created, added to, nor taken away from. And both use up material in the process. And both generate currents of force, which is capable of affecting changes in other substances, etc. Science shows us that there is a production or generation of heat in the manifestation of mind energy in the brain. The temperature of the brain rises while it is employed in active thought work or other forms of mental activity or excitement. And even the temperature of a tiny nerve increases when it is used. There is no use in disputing this fact. It has been fully demonstrated by science. The nature of mental states. What causes the brain to manifest this energy? Mental states. What is a mental state? Well, you know what mental means, and state means a condition. So a mental state is a mental condition. Then yes. Then upon what do mental states or conditions depend? And why do they vary? Well, upon the degrees of vibration of excitement of the mental apparatus. Mental apparatus then has a thing to have a mental apparatus before it can manifest mental states. Original or induced. Yes, but remember this, everything has its mental apparatus, even down to the atom and the particles that compose atoms. Everything feels and responds to feeling, even among the most material forms. Science states this emphatically, and everything that feels and responds must manifest desire and will, if only in an elementary way, and must have mental apparatus in order to do this. There is mind and the machinery of mind in every atom and all that is evolved therefrom. This is not my personal statement alone, but is the last word of modern science, as voiced by her most advanced advocates. Vibrational excitement. Vibration of excitement, I have said. What is vibration? Well, it is a state of intense rapid movement of a particle. Science informs us that everything is in vibration, always, and that the differing nature of things depends upon their respective rate of vibrations. And what is excitement, as I use the term? Well, it means aroused activity. So then, there is to be found a condition of aroused vibrational activity underlying all mental states. Yes, that's just it. And this aroused vibrational activity communicates motion to the mentative currents and starts them toward others in whom they induce similar mental states. That is the story in full. How the vibrations are transmitted. Well, then, we have a mental state of aroused vibrational activity of all individual. How is this passed on to other individuals without direct contact? By mentative currents or waves. What are mentative currents or waves, and how do they operate? Well, now we are right up to the question with a full understanding of what it means. Then let us answer it in the light of modern science. The science of telementation about currents and waves. There is a great misapprehension in the minds of the majority of people about currents and waves of light, magnetism, electricity, heat, etc. They are aware that heat and light, for instance, travel over millions and millions of miles from the sun to the earth, and are then felt here, although originating there millions of miles away. They know this fully, but they seem to think that the heat and light actually travel in waves over the distance. But this is not the teaching of science, which on the contrary holds that light and heat do not so travel, but that the original heat and light vibrations, for that is what light and heat is, a matter of vibrations, set up waves in the ether. The ether is a supposititious fine form of matter filling all space, even between the atoms, as swell as between the worlds. Nobody knows anything actually about the ether, but science has been forced to postulate its existence in order to account for certain phenomena. Ethereal waves. Well then, science holds that these waves in the ether, once set into motion, travel on until they come in contact with matter capable of taking up their vibrations. When this kind of matter is found, it takes up the ethereal vibrations and reproduces them in the shape of heat and light. In other words, the original light and heat of the sun does not travel to the earth to be then experienced by the latter, but on the contrary, the original solar heat and light set up the waves in the ether, which travel along until the earth is reached. When meeting with the proper material, they are reproduced or transformed into heat and light vibrations similar to those of the original impulse, and we on the earth feel the heat and see the light. Electricity and magnetism are reproduced in the same way. Do you see? It is just like the voice vibrations, setting up electrical vibration in the telephone, which travel along and then are retransformed into voice vibrations, again at the other end of the line. Do you understand it now? And when you think of this, please remember that the receiving end vibrations are induced. Now you begin to see what I am driving at, don't you? The law of wave motion. And there is something else, just as much generally misunderstood. People think that these waves actually travel, but they don't. No, waves travel. But you may say, waves in water travel. When we drop a stone in the pond, no, they don't. What really happens is that the motion of the stone produces an elevation of the water that you call a wave. Then the motion is passed on and another wave is formed. Then another and another until you have a series of waves that apparently travel toward the shore. But the waves don't travel. They merely communicate their motion to the particles of the water next to them, and a continuous moving effort is exhibited. Experimental proof. The real motion of a wave is up and down only. Place a cork in the water and then create waves, and you'll see that while the wave motion travels outward, the cork merely bobs up and down and does not move with the waves. Here's how science illustrates the motion. It bids you take a rope and tie one end of it to a post or wall, etc. The loose end being retained in your hand. Now slack the rope a little and begin to agitate it up and down. What happens? You will see a wave motion generated and a series of waves passing over the rope from your hand to the post or wall. And yet you know the rope itself has not traveled, but has merely moved up and down. It is not a matter of travel, but of communicated and induced motion. Try the experiment yourself. Do you see it now? Well, all waves are alike in this respect. Light waves, heat waves, electrical waves, magnetic waves, and mind waves all communicate vibrations which move on in a wave motion. Waves in the ocean of mind. But these heat and light waves are waves in the ether, which ether is a material thing. Do I hold that mind waves are the same? Not exactly. I hold that the universal mentative energy is higher even than the finest ethereal matter, and that it pervades the later. And I hold that we are all centers of mentative activity in a great ocean of mentative energy. We are like bubbles in the ocean. So use a crude figure of speech. And therefore, I claim that the mentative currents and waves are really currents and waves in that great ocean of mentative energy. And the vibrational activity set up in your mind, my mind, or the minds of thousands, pass on their vibrations to the great ocean of mentative energy and produce waves or currents of energy, which travel on until they reach the mental apparatus of other individuals, in which they tend to reproduce the original vibrations or mental states by induction. Remember? Mentative waves and currents. In other words, I hold that these waves and currents are like the ocean's waves and currents, not only of the ocean, but also in it. My idea of the mentative currents or waves are that they are not only manifestations of the universal mentative energy, but also that they travel in the ocean of that universal principle. And that great mentative ocean is full of currents and waves and eddies and swirls and whirlpools and gulf streams and other forms of activity. Important principles. I must ask every student to acquaint himself with the principles of these mentative currents as I have stated them from the beginning of this lesson up to this page, and he may get an idea of the laws and operations of telementation. The analogy between the two oceans of water and mentative energy, respectively, is so close that an understanding of one will throw much light on the other. As above, so below. As below, so above, says the old occult aphorism. Each plane of life has its corresponding manifestations. Study the physical world, and you will understand the metaphysical. A mental picture. And now, having familiarized you with the idea of the ocean of mentative energy and the currents, waves, whirlpools, etc. contained therein, I must ask you to use your imagination to the full in order to form a mental picture of this great mentative ocean, so that you may fully understand the laws in operation in its manifestations. This mental picture, if firmly fixed in your mind, will give you always a key to any manifestation of mentative energy along the lines of telementation that you may be called upon to consider, examine, or study. If one can form this mental picture clearly and distinctly, he will always be able to grasp the secret of mental magic. Besides which, the very clearness of the picture will enable him to more intelligently apply the mentative energy when he sees fit, without the resistance ordinarily set up in the average mind, because of the inability to see just what is needed. Here is the mystical mental picture. The sea of energy. Picture to yourself a great ocean of mind. If you are unable to grasp the abstract idea of mind as a principle, then do the next best thing and think of this mental ocean as a great sea of electrical energy. Or, if you prefer, think of it as a great ether of force filling all space. At any rate, the picture must show this mind energy as filling all space, even in between the atoms, and even in the atoms themselves. Perhaps you had better commence by forming the picture of all space as being empty of all forms and shapes, and containing nothing but this pure mental energy, mind principle, an ocean of mind, with nothing else in it. All mind, remember? And this mind must be thought of as an energy or force, capable of setting into operation all kinds of manifestations when started. The formation of centers. Then think of a tiny center of energy being formed in this great mind ocean, a little whirlpool, so tiny that the strongest microscopes could scarcely distinguish it. Then see countless numbers of similar whirlpools being formed in this ocean of mind. These little whirlpools we will call centers of energy. They combine and shapes begin to appear. Atoms of matter appear, being composed of combination of these tiny centers, which thus become larger and greater centers. Then come combinations of these atoms, and the various forms of matter result. For all substances, you know, are composed of atoms in various combinations, all the atoms seemingly being composed of little particles called electrons, which seem to be like tiny units of force, but which are attracted and repelled by each other and seem to have their likes and dislikes, thus showing the elements of mind within them. From simple to complex. And then these shapes and forms of matter become more and more complex, and the centers of energy more potent, and the forms of living things begin to appear, mounting from the lowly microscopic cell onto the combination of cells in plant life, then animal life, and then human life. And each form, as it mounts higher, displays more and more power of mind, until at last we see man with his wonderful mind as a great center of energy in this great ocean of mind. The essence of energy. But remember this always, that all these shapes and forms and cells and plants and animals and men have their inner essential substance, this same mind principle of which the ocean itself is composed. They are centers of activity in this mind ocean, but are composed of the same substance as the ocean itself. You may think of them as vibratory whirlpools of mind, if you like, and you will not be very far out of the way if you do. You see that at last, and underneath all is mind, and all is in mind. I shall not go into the metaphysical side of the question, although I have studied deeply that phase of the matter, but I shall confine myself to the scientific side of the question in these lessons. But this idea of all is mind, that is, all things are centers of mental activity and energy in the great universal ocean of mind energy, is scientifically correct. And it is correct from the advanced occult position also. There is no conflict between true occultism and true science when each understands each other's terms. The degrees of power. Now then, the centers of energy are the varying degrees of force and activity. We will call the strong ones positive and the weak ones negative. So according to their varying degrees of power and vibration, each center is positive to some others and negative to others still. Each has its degree of positivity. Now think of these centers as human minds, and you will be able to fill out your picture in detail. The centers in action. And then picture each one of these centers manifesting vibrational activity, and thus converting and transforming the mentative energy from the ocean of mind, and then see them sending out waves and currents of mentative energy, which induce similar vibrations or mental states in other centers, and then see some of the strong positive centers setting up great rotating currents resembling whirlpools in the body of the mind ocean, which extend further and further out from the center and affect other centers far from it. Rotary currents. And if you will examine your picture more closely, you will see that these rotary currents are continually drawing to these centers the things and persons and ideas they are attracting by reason of their particular rate of vibration, while things of different vibrations seem to be comparatively unaffected by the currents. This and other things you may see in your picture as it grows clearer to you. And in addition to these currents, you see great waves traveling out in certain directions toward certain objects to which they have been directed. In short, you see all the phenomena of the ocean of water reproduced in this ocean of mind. You see the picture of the circulation of mind. You see the forming and growing and evolution of centers of activity and mentative energy. The two poles of activity. And when you come to look a little closer at your picture, you will see that each of these centers of energy seems to have two poles of activity. One which acts in the direction of impelling, driving, pushing, forcing, urging, directing, etc., the action being always outward, and the other acting in the direction of drawing, pulling, attracting, coaxing, alluring, charming, leading, etc., the action always being inward. One seems to be a masculine force and the other a feminine force. One seems to act as willpower, the other as desire force. Motive power and emotive force. These two poles of mentative energy possessed by each center are called the motive pole and the emotive pole, respectively. I've described their characteristics several times as we have proceeded in these lessons. But once more, let me call your attention to the meaning of the terms applied to them. Motive means, of course, that which moves, that which excites to action. Emotive means that which moves or excites the feelings. You will remember that excitement means aroused activity. So then emotive means that which arouses the feelings into activity. And the emotive side of the mind always has to do with feelings, and the motive with willing. And the best results always rise from a combination of both feeling and willing, desiring and acting, as in all other things. A combination of the masculine and feminine qualities and characteristics produces the best results. Each has its strong and weak points, but together they are irresistible along all lines of work, physical, mental, and spiritual. A great moving picture. And now, the broad outlines of our mental picture have been drawn, and the general details filled in. But our picture is more than this. It is a moving picture in vivid action and spirited motion. It will show us the varied phenomena of telementation in a series of moving, acting, realistic, thrilling scenes. And yet all will occur right on in the picture itself, without going outside of it for material. The mental picture contains the material for an infinite variety of action and combination. It is a world within itself. And now, good students, we will set the machinery into operation and show you your mental picture of this mind ocean and its centers of energy in full motion and activity. Kindly give me your full attention while I describe the moving scenes to you. Phenomena of the second plane. In describing the action of this magic mental picture, I will suppose that you are a highly developed occultist and consequently are able to see on what occultists call the second plane, without going into the subject in detail here, for it forms no part of this present work. I will say that the occultists recognize 7 planes of life, all of which have their own laws and phenomena. The first plane is our ordinary material plane, the phenomena of which may be observed by all having their physical senses. This first plane is the plane of matter, and all of its phenomena is that of matter. All that can be seen on that plane is the movement or presence of matter. Even when we say that we see the manifestation of some force on this plane, we really mean that we see that force as it produces a movement or change in matter. We do not see the force at all. All we see is the matter moved by the force. Do you see what I mean? The plane of forces, the second plane, is the plane of forces on which operate energy or force in all its forms. Occultists who have reached the second degree of unfoldment are able to sense the phenomena of this second plane. That is, they are able to witness the phenomena of the forces on their own plane and independent of the presence of matter. To illustrate this, I would say that on the first plane, the plane of the majority of the race, phenomena attaching to electricity can be sensed only through the agency of the matter in which the electricity operates. You can see material objects moved by electricity, but you cannot see the electricity itself. The same is true of magnetism. You may see the needle drawn to the magnet, but you cannot see the current of magnetic vibrations themselves. You cannot see the vibratory light waves, but you can see the manifestation of light when these waves strike upon a material object. Direct sensing of the forces. But on the second plane, those who have attained the second degree report that the vibratory waves of electricity, magnetism, light, heat, etc., are capable of being sensed by them without the presence of the material agent. They report that they are able to see the vibrations themselves. For instance, they can see the waves of electricity or magnetism as they pass through the ether and before they reach the material objects, which they affect in a way visible to the ordinary eye. They report that even the vibratory waves of the X-ray are visible to them, without the agency of the fluorescent screen used by scientific men before the X-rays become apparent to them. You know, of course, that these X-rays, and in fact also the higher rays of ordinary light, are invisible to the human eye, although capable of being recorded by instruments, photographic plates, etc. The second and third planes. And these second plane people report that the vibrations of the mentative waves or currents are plainly perceptible to them. But mark you this, notwithstanding that some of these second plane people believe and will tell you that they can see thought or can see mind waves themselves, they are mistaken. All that they can see is the force of energy of these waves or currents, but mind in itself they cannot see at all. This last is reserved for the third plane or mental plane. To make this plainer, these second plane people, seeing the force of energy, are mistaking it for mind itself, are just like the first plane people who see the material motions of phenomena and think they are seeing electricity, magnetism, etc. in themselves. The third plane phenomena is purely mental, and those who have reached the third degree of occult unfoldment report that they are able to see mind in itself. They are unable to tell us just what it looks like, for the reason that it is different from anything that we know on either the material plane or even the plane of forces. It is something different. It is the essence of energy. The four higher planes. The remaining four planes, that is, the fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh planes, respectively, are subjects that belong to the higher degrees of occultism and form no part of these lessons or subject. I merely mentioned them so that advanced students may recognize that I am aware of their existence and importance, and I am not misled by any erroneous belief in there being only three planes, which some of the teachers have fallen into. These lessons belong to the second plane teachings and do not deal with the third plane except incidentally. They deal with the energy phase of mind, that is, mind in its aspect of mentative energy. Someday I may write of the higher planes, but not now. The second plane sights. So, to return to our magic mental picture, I will assume that you are able to sense the second plane phenomena and thus actually see the passage and existence of the mentative waves and currents. By giving you the teachings in this way, I will be able to picture the phenomena much clearer than if I held to the first plane method. I want to show you the forces themselves, as well as their effect upon material forms. You understand just what I mean now, don't you? The tinted thought clouds. Well, the first thing that you will see in our magic mental picture is the presence of great clouds of vapory substance, somewhat resembling the fleecy clouds of a summer day, although some of the clouds are much heavier and darker looking, and you will note the presence of color in these clouds, some of them being a dull gray and others being tinted like the clouds at sunset or sunrise. It is a beautiful sight, this ever-changing mass of colored clouds of all kinds, shapes, forms, and degrees of density. Let us consider just what these various colors mean, for each has its own meaning, the color being dependent upon the degree of vibration, and the degree of vibration depending upon the feeling which started the waves into motion. I had not intended to mention this in these lessons, but I now see that I cannot omit it without causing a loss to my students. When one gets talking about second plane phenomena, it is hard to refrain from telling the story through to the finish. The emotional colors. Let me give you the emotional colors that you may recognize them as you see them in the picture. Here they are. Spiritual blue. Blue is the vibrational color pertaining to spiritual feeling and represents the various religious feelings and emotions, the shade growing lighter as the religious concept rises toward true spirituality. Light blue represents a high, unselfish spiritual feeling, a beautiful violet representing the highest religious feeling, and a peculiar shade which may be called ultraviolet, representing a spiritual unfoldment of a very high order. Intellectual yellow. Yellow is the vibrational color appertaining to the feelings and emotions associated with intellectual power, the shade growing clearer as the intellect mounts to higher conceptions. A dull dark yellow is the color of the ordinary intellectual state, while the brilliant intellect shows itself in a beautiful golden hue. There is a shade still higher than this, although most rare among the race. I allude to that shade of the true primary yellow, which belongs to those who have attained a high degree of true occult unfoldment, the spiritually illumined. The highest occult teachings inform us that the vibrational shade belonging to spirit of the essence of being is a pure white light of an unusual brilliancy. Orange and brown. Orange, this shade, which is a combination of yellow and red, pertains to those possessing the pride of intellectuality or intellectual ambition of a marked degree. Brown is the vibrational color of avarice and greed. Passional red. Red is the vibrational color of passion in all its phases. Dull, deep red betokens the animal passions and sensuality. A dark, bright red betokens anger and hate. When mingled with black, it is anger or hate arising from malice or envy. When mingled with green, it relates to anger arising from jealousy or envy. When shown without the mingling color, it denotes fight for some supposed right or ordinary cause. When this color is seen in the shade of crimson, it betokens a higher form of love, the shade becoming lighter and clearer as the degree of feeling advances in the scale of character. A gross selfish love shows a dull crimson, while a higher form of love displays a clearer shade, terminating in a shade approaching a soft rose color, when the character of the attachment is on a high plane. Deceitful green. Green is a peculiar vibrational color. It betokens a number of odd phases of feeling and emotion. A peculiar, dull, dirty green betokens jealousy or envy. A grayish green indicates deceit, which shade becomes clearer and brighter as the quality of the deceit rises in the scale. A bright, clear shade of green is seen when there is a manifestation of tact, diplomacy, politeness, adaptability, etc., etc. Negative gray. Gray is a negative vibrational color, which in its dark shades indicates gloom, depression, or melancholy, etc. And in a bright, clear shade indicates selfishness, and in a certain pallid shade indicates fear or terror. Hateful black. Black is the vibrational color of hate, malice, revenge, and similar states of feeling. These vibrational emotional colors, of course, combine and blend into each other in countless combinations, but the above will give you a key to the same. The appearance of desire and will. The vibrational colors of the two mental poles can scarcely be called colors at all, for their colors and shades are derived from the character of the feeling inspiring them, which gives to them the degree of vibration and color indicating the motive or motive impulse. But there may be seen a difference even in these two, that is, the emotive pole and its currents of desire force shows a scintillating effect, as if there were a multitude of minute sparks or stars in the current, and the motive pole and its currents of willpower shows an effect something like a multitude of tiny and minute lightning flashes playing in the stream or current. Vitality vibrations. In addition to the shades mentioned above, there is another that should be mentioned while we are considering the subject. I allude to what might be called the vitality vibrations, which radiate from the living body and which are caused by the vital force which permeates the body during life and makes possible the running of the physical machinery. Some prefer to call it nerve force. These vibrations show no special color, although when near or in the body they manifest a faint reddish tint. But when seen away from the body, they show a lack of color, like clear water, and resemble the heated air arising from a stove, lamp, or heated ground. That is to say, they look like colorless, vibrating body of air. The degree and strength of these vibrations depend upon the state of physical health of the person manifesting them. Now, as we gaze upon our magic mental picture and see moving thereon the shapes and forms of human beings, we may see that each being is surrounded with an aura or egg-shaped atmosphere of these emotional vibrations, radiations emanated from his mental states. This aura extends out from the body for a distance of about 1 yard and gradually fades away as the distance from the body is increased. And the aura of each person is seen to be colored according to the vibrations belonging to his prevailing mental states. The colors of the mental states. Each mental state shows itself in its appropriate shade, in the proper combinations, blendings, etc., and therefore the trained occultist is able to read a person's character like an open book from these emotional colors. And even though one may not be manifesting any special mental state at the moment, his aura will still be colored because of his prevailing mental state, his character, as it were. And of course, these vibrations composing the aura of a person will affect those coming in contact with or near him or her. That is the reason why we feel the personal atmospheres of people when we come near them. Even beyond the visible aura, the vibrations continue in a fainter degree, and so on our picture we can tell just what kind of people are passing before us. Their mental states are revealed by the emotional colors. How people affect each other. And now we shall see how people affect each other. We see one man approach another. The degree of magnetic positivity of the first man is superior to that of the second. And we see as we watch that the coloring of his aura gradually interpenetrates that of the weaker man, and the coloring of the latter's aura gradually grows to more closely resemble that of the first man. We may watch the process and thus become aware that the following things are happening, viz., the mental states of the first man are inducing similar feelings and emotions in the second man by means of the currents of mentative energy that are flowing toward him. The first man is making no effort to impress the second man, but being the more positive, his magnetism affects that of the other man and induces similar states. The second man takes on the states of the first man, as we may see by the change in coloring. This is the way that people unconsciously affect other people, and the latter are unconsciously affected. Simply a case of unconscious mentative induction, you see. Suggestion viewed. The second man moves on, feeling more depressed or elated, as the case may be, by reason of his contact with the first man, and also carrying away with him a little of the other man's general feelings and character. This second man, a little later on, meets another man, and we may see how this new man affects the second man by the suggestion of his manner and words. He does not seem to be sending out such strong torrents as the man first spoken of, but his outward symbols of voice, words, manner, etc. are well added out, and we soon see our second man having mental states induced in him by suggestion. You have now seen two stages or phases of mentative induction. A positive exhibition. Our positive man has gone on his way, and soon he spies another man whom he wishes to influence in certain matters. Watch him now, and you will see something interesting. The positive man's aura seems to be disturbed, and great tongues of color seem to leap from it and lap around the other man, the whole process resembling the action of tongues of flame at a fire. These tongues of mentative currents wrap themselves all around the other man, and some seem to scintillate as they manifest the action of fairly pulling him toward the positive man, while others seem to be beating upon him like a rain of tiny flashes of lightning. The one is the play of desire force, and the other the action of willpower. This gives us a good illustration of personal influence in an interview or a phase of personal magnetism. Willpower lightning. As the action grows more spirited, you may see the willpower of the positive man darting out in straight, sharp flashes, like great sparks from an electric battery, and you may see the process by which he beats down and neutralizes the willpower of the weaker man until he seems to exhaust it and take it captive. The man acquiesces in the statements and demands of the stronger-willed man. Desire force induction. This process is hastened by the fact that the desire force of the weaker man has become so impressed by the stronger will that it becomes dazed or fascinated, the effect being strongly increased by the desire force of the stronger man setting up mentative induction, a corresponding vibration in the desire pole of the weaker man. And a fourth element in the attack is that the strong desire force of the strong man also tends to pull the will of the weaker one toward it and away from its natural mate, its own desire pole. A combined attack. This is the case of a combined, determined attack. It is true that the positive man may not know a single fact regarding mental magic, but he has learned the process of affecting and influencing others and bending them to his will and desire, although he is ignorant of the scientific explanation of the process. Every positive magnetic man understands this instinctively, and his knowledge increases as practice gives him more confidence in himself. Charming, alluring attraction. These people pass from the scene, and we may see in their place men and women, charming, alluring, and drawing others by reason of their desire force operating along the lines of so-called love, but which is but little more than selfish animal passion, in some cases grosser than that manifested by the animals, because it is abnormal in its manifestations and inordinate in its demands. Repelling attacks. We see much of this in our picture, but we notice here and there that some man or woman seems able to repel these attractions easily and are not affected by the currents of desire. Why? Because their general mental state is so dissimilar that too much resistance is interposed, and the attacking current is deflected and defeated, even without the use of a great effort of the will. You see many instances of this in all forms of mentative influence. Like attracts like in this mentative work, and those who are attracted are generally those whose mental states correspond to the greater extent with those of the person affecting them. There are, of course, exceptions to this rule owing to ignorance and lack of experience, coupled with confidence and trust, but the rule is true in general. The force in churches, etc. Passing before you in the picture, you see preachers influencing their congregations. You see the great currents of mentative energy rolling over the hall or church, the congregations being in a receptive and passive attitude, with wills relaxed. They actually draw out the force of the preacher. You may judge just what grade of religious feeling the preacher is pouring out by examining the shade of his blue emotional color. You will be apt to see a better shade among the poorer churches and denominations, and a very repulsive dark purplish blue among the fashionable churches as a rule. You will notice also the waves and currents arising from the congregation, which establishes the atmosphere of the church, and which will be immediately felt by a stranger entering its doors. You will see similar things at the theaters and political meetings and all gatherings of people. The color always gives you the key to the character of the meeting and the people attending it. The hypnotist's force. Next, you see the hypnotist and his subject. In a public hall, you will notice that the hypnotist's emotional color is not attractive. You will notice the neutral gray color of the aura of the subject, who seems to have squeezed every bit of his own mental states out of him. He is a professional subject and is a slave of the professor. You will see the professor's magnetism pouring into the subject and filling his mind completely. You will see how the will of the professor supplants the will of the subject and dominates him absolutely. You will notice that both the desire pole and the will pole of the subject seem to show no energy of their own, but are moved entirely by the personality and mind of the operator. This is an extreme case, of course, but it better illustrates the phenomena and its effects upon the audience. You may determine just how far advanced mentally they are, the color giving you the cue. The part played by suggestion. Of course, mental suggestion is playing its part in all these cases, but we cannot see that because it is not a current or a wave, but it is merely the operation of outward symbols in the direction of inducing mental states in others. We may see the induced mental states, but can learn the nature of the suggestion only by watching and listening at what is said and done. I am mentioning only a few of the many cases that you are witnessing in the picture, but these few cases will illustrate the different phases of the principle and operation of the force. But all of these cases have given you merely an illustration of telementation at short range. Now, let us proceed to examine the instances of the operation of the same force at long range in all of its many and wonderful phases. Mental atmospheres of towns and places. Before doing so, however, let us take a quick look at the mental atmospheres of the towns, cities, and villages, as well as of the buildings, localities, etc., passing before us on the picture. This is most interesting and instructive. In the first place, you will notice the great clouds of mentative energy permeating every place and every corner, each showing its own shade of vibrational color, indicating the vibrations arising from the prevalence of certain mental states. I've spoken of the causes of this in a previous lesson and shall not repeat the details here. You will remember that I have explained to you how the various currents of mentative energy of all kinds and degrees come in contact with each other and often blend, combine, or else act in the direction of neutralizing each other's force. Currents of similar degree of vibration harmonize and form combinations or blendings. Opposing vibrations and currents tend to antagonize each other and neutralize each other's force. I have explained this at length in Lesson 2. In this way are the mental atmospheres of places formed. You may see them in the picture. Mental vibrations persist, but you may ask, why do these clouds persist after the person has sent them forth? The answer is that the force once set into motion persists for a greater or lesser time depending upon the intensity of the original impulse. Just as the light of a star, or rather its light waves, exist and move on centuries after the star has ceased to be, just as the heat vibrations continue in a room when the producing cause has been removed, just as odors remain when the cause moves away, so do the mentative vibrations and their corresponding thought forms continue long after the original feeling has passed away, yet for years afterwards in some cases. Why places are unlucky, haunted, etc. In this way, places, houses, stores, etc., mountain atmospheres imparted by the vibrations of people long since moved away or passed away. Stores are unlucky because of the negative mental states of some people who have occupied them. Houses are haunted by reason of the vibrations arising from intense desire or feelings, or horror and fear of some one participating in a crime, either as criminal or victim. The atmospheres of prisons are quite noticeable, even to the ordinary visitor, who feels the vibrations with which the place is saturated. The atmosphere of places of low pleasures is equally noticeable. I know of a place of this kind in which the vibrations continued for years after the original tenants had departed and the building had been used for business purposes. Hospitals have a very depressing influence upon the majority of people. Of course, these negative effects can be removed by mentally treating the place or room and send forth streams of mentative energy of a positive, stimulating character. Positive atmospheres, on the other hand, the presence of an active, energetic, successful man or set of men in a place will permeate the place with positive vibrations that will stimulate all who abide there. I have in mind a certain large office building in a large city which is filled with these vibrations, originally arising from a few leading men who built and occupied it, and then attracted to themselves of the same kind. The result being that the combined influence now renders the place an inspiration for those having offices in it. I have heard people say that after moving in that building, their businesses doubled itself and their energy increased in the same proportion. There is a law underlying these things, and if people understood it, they would take advantage of its positive sides and avoid its negative phases. I think that I have given you a good strong hint in this direction. Better heed it. Thought forms. These great clouds of vapory manifested mentative energy often constitute what is called thought forms, which I shall proceed to describe to you. Follow my explanation of these things as they appear on the picture, please. These thought forms are really feeling forms, remember, although I use the more familiar term. These thought forms, although all generated or created in the same manner, differ very materially in their characteristics and details. Let us consider some of these details and characteristics and appearances. The appearance of thought forms. By appearances, I mean, of course, their appearance to those who can sense on the second plane. But whether one can so sense or not, the effect of these thought forms manifest upon them just the same. It is not necessary to see a thing in order to feel its influence. But you understand this, of course, from what has been said already. The most common form is that of a series of undulating waves or ripples of a vapory cloud-like substance, passing out from the mind of the person experiencing the mental state originating them. The waves manifesting a ring-like form moving out in every direction from the common center, just as do the rings caused by a stone having been dropped in a pond. The distance traveled and the rate of speed manifested depends upon the intensity of the emotional impulse. The speed diminishes according to the distance traveled, but long after the actual motion seems to have ceased. There exists an almost imperceptible motion that causes the outer wave to drift on in a lazy, listless manner. Smoke-like forms. Although variety of thought form manifests like a volume of smoke being blown from the lips of a cigar smoker, such forms pour out in long streams, then spread out and broaden, although maintaining the direction originally imparted to them. This form arises when the mental state arises directly in connection with some other person or thing, and when the attention of the mentator is centered consciously or unconsciously upon that person or thing. In this case, the motion of thought form is in the direction of the person or thing being directly considered by the mentator. Akin to this form is a series of forms resembling the puffing forth of smoke from a huge smokestack. Great puffs of mentative thought forms being sent out in a certain direction as the jerky, repeated mentative impulses are originated and manifested in the mind of the mentator. Interesting forms. Other kinds of thought forms pour forth steadily but lazily in the direction of the object thought of. Others still are ejected in all directions from the mentator, like the steam escaping from the lid of a tea kettle, which is being lifted by the force of the steam within. Still another form appears like a streak of light flashing from a mirror held in the sun. Certain particular forms of willpower manifest as vivid lightning flashes. Other forms travel and seem to enfold the object thought of, and which, being impelled by the strong desire of the mentator, act as if they were trying to draw back to him the objects desired. In fact, that is exactly the nature of the action of this class of thought forms, the effect produced depending, of course, upon the positiveness of the mentator and the strength of the desire. The effect, of course, also is materially influenced by the degree of positiveness of the person affected and other attractions which prevent the yielding to the pull of desire force. A strong desire force. In the case of a strong desire on the part of the mentator, providing that the ruling passion is being manifested day after day, there appears a combination of thought forms which resembles a huge octopus of dense structure with enormous vapory tentacles or arms reaching out in all directions, seeking the thing desired and endeavoring to draw it back to its center. In the case of a high aspiration backed by a strong and active will, this combination will appear tinted with a color and shade of vibrational color corresponding with the character of the mental state. while in the case of a lower character of desire, the darker colors will likewise manifest themselves. Peculiar forms. Still, another kind of thought form acts as if it were trying to push back the object in some particular direction, while others seem to hold back the object. In both of these cases, the action and direction of the thought form depends upon the nature and character of the desire or will of the mentator at the time of the conception of the mentative current. A most peculiar kind of thought form appears when the mentator is desirous of obtaining information regarding some certain subject and is earnestly sending his desire force in all directions in order to draw it to him. The mentator generally being unconscious or at least in ignorance of the nature of the actual process. In this case, the thought form maintains a thin connection with the mind of the mentator, and darting here and there, it attracts to itself the thought forms emanating from the minds of others, which may happen to contain the desired vibrations. It even reaches out to the presence of other mentators and absorbs the mentative vibrations emanating from them, and literally steals their ideas, if they have not properly guarded the same by their will. The mentative wire. In this connection, I may call to your attention the well-known fact that persons thinking along the same lines, although in different parts of the world, are often brought into close rapport with each other in this way, as many people know by their own experience. In this case, the thought forms seem to act as a sort of mentative wire, conveying the vibrations from one mind to another, very much akin to this last mentioned kind of thought form, and another which occurs in instances of direct telemental communication between persons. In this case, the thought form proceeds in a long, straight line from the one mind to the other, and then acts as a direct wire, conveying the mentative currents or vibrations from one to the other. Rotary forms. There is another variety of thought form that spreads out in gradually winding sweeps, the thought form having a rotary motion. The sweeps are in a constantly widening circle and reach out further and further each day, according to the impulse imparted to them by the mentator. But the most peculiar feature of this thought form is a strange movement towards its center, by which it sucks in all that it attracts to its vortex. This phase is manifested by men of strong positivity, whose enterprise and schemes are spread over large areas, and who set themselves up as a center of this mentative whirlpool, and draw to themselves all that come within the sweep of their influence. They make things come their way, in fact. Thought forms like living forces. I've described but a few of the manifold appearances and varieties of the thought forms that you see before you on the picture, but we shall consider a few more in detail as we proceed with the lesson. In thinking of these thought forms, always picturing them as having shape and form like any material substance, for by doing so you will better realize the nature of their workings. Some thought forms indeed are not only things, but become so infused by the intense desire and will of the mentator that they become almost like living forces. Such thought forms carry the characteristics of the mentator to such an extent, are infused with his nature to such a degree, that when they are felt, they seem almost like the actual presence of the mentator himself. That is, as if he were present, urging his claims or statements in person. Rare cases. Such cases are, of course, rare so far as conscious production is concerned. They may be good or bad. A strong desire on the part of a dying person has often caused an actual appearance by a loved one or a friend, although the soul had not yet left the body. And in cases of dire distress or need, people often so draw upon those who care for them, that the latter will send to them a powerful thought form of help, advice, and assistance. Trained occultists can do this voluntarily and consciously, but very few others have reached this stage. The operation of telementation. And now let us return to the consideration of the various forms of the practical operation of telementation. You will of course realize that even in case of mentative influence in personal interviews, with the exception of suggestion, there is a passage of mentative currents and a manifestation of telementation. The distance between the two minds is slight, but the principle in operation is precisely the same as when the distance is hundreds of miles, and the process is identical. Two forms of one force. And you will also remember that when I speak of desire force and willpower, I am speaking of the force of the respective two poles of mentative energy. Both of these forms are but phases of the same energy or force, mentative energy. So do not imagine that there are three distinct forces. There is but one force, and that is mentative energy, of which willpower and desire force respectively are but manifestations. The difference depending upon the two respective poles of force, the motive and emotive, respectively. I trust that you will remember this. The two manifestations. I will divide the manifestations of telementation into two general classes, viz. Number one, specialized telementation. That is the use of the force with the direct purpose of affecting a certain person or persons. 2. Generalized telementation. That is the use of the force with only a general purpose of affecting the desired result, without special attention to any particular person or persons. We will now consider these two classes of telementation in their different phases. Specialized telementation. First, in considering the subject of specialized telementation, we see the cases of personal influence exerted in personal interviews and under other circumstances in which the mentator and the other person or persons are in close contact, that is, within each other's sight. Under this subclass falls the phenomenon of fascination, personal magnetism, hypnotism, personal influence, persuasion, charming, inducing, etc., etc., in all of their many and varied phases. We have seen these several manifestations as we have proceeded in these lessons, and we need not stop to further consider them at length in this place. You understand that the effect is caused by the outpouring of the mentative energy in the forms of willpower and desire force, to the end that similar mental states are induced in the minds of others, and the desire or will of the mentator is satisfied, to a greater or lesser degree, or completeness according to the circumstances of the case. Long-range influence. The second subclass includes those instances of telementation at a long range, which produces the phenomena of mental influencing, will projection, voodooism, witchcraft, and other forms of influencing under many names and disguises, including, of course, the employment of the force for the benefit and advantage of the person treated or influenced, as well as the repulsive and deplorable uses alluded to as having been practiced by all peoples in all times, for the purpose of injury to others and selfish profit and advantage to the users. White magic and black. The one is what is known as white magic, or use of the force in an unselfish and justifiable way, and with worthy ends in view, and black magic, or the use of the same force for unworthy ends and in selfish and unjustifiable ways. But, as I have said in the early part of these lessons, this force is like any other great natural force and is capable of being used for good or for evil, according to the moral state of the user. It is true that the black magician is always entangled in his own web, sooner or later and falls a victim to the forces he has aroused. But that does not alter the statement that I have made. The practical workings. In this form of telementation, the mentator usually concentrates upon the person or thing that he wishes to affect, and then consciously and by the use of his will, he sends to that person or thing a current or currents of desire force or willpower or both. It is known to occultists that the degree of effect so produced depends largely upon the degree of concentration employed by the mentator. The degree of concentration depends upon the will and is manifested in the form of attention. The mental image. The usual plan is to use the concentrated will to form a clear mental image of the person or thing to be affected, and then proceed as if one were in the actual presence of the person. The clearer the image, the greater the degree of concentrated will employed, and consequently, the greater the degree of the projecting power of the current. Underlying all the varied phenomena of adverse treatments, witchcraft, etc., is this same form of telementation. No cause for fear. But right here, I wish to say an important word, and that is that the generally acclaimed effect of these forms of adverse influence is greatly exaggerated. And all real occultists know that the principal reason of the unquestioned instances of the effect of this power lies in the mental state of belief, faith, and fear of the persons affected. That is, if one believes or fears that another has the power of adversely influencing or affecting him, then the effect produced will depend largely upon the degree of faith or fear. The evil effects of fear. The persons who are affected by adverse treatments or witchcraft or similar forms of adverse influence invariably believe and fear that these influences are effective against them. By their mental states, they render themselves negative and receptive to the influences directed against them. This is an occult truth, and one that should be made widely known. It is the antidote to the bane of adverse treatments, of which we hear so much in modern times as well as in ancient history under various names. If people would only brace up and assert their individual power as centers of energy, they would surround themselves with such a positive protective aura that the waves of adverse vibrations would beat against them without ever reaching within their mental structure. Adverse treatments. We hear of many cases of people being treated in this way. In these latter days of pseudo-occultism, we hear of treaters making denials regarding people and thus sending them adverse telementation. These people will assert and work themselves up into a corresponding feeling of, I deny that so-and-so is well or prosperous, etc., etc. So even going so far as to deny that the other person is, you may imagine the effective currents of this feeling reaching the mind rendered negative by belief and fear that the other person can so affect them. The suggestion of the fear or belief, and that is just what it is, suggestion, renders the mind of such a person a fit receptive agent for the adverse treatment. How to neutralize adverse treatments? I tell you, if you will but assert your individuality and assume the fearless attitude, you will be able to laugh in the faces of these adverse practitioners of black magic. For that is just what it is, no matter how much they may try to disguise it by pious names. Black magicians in disguise. These modern adverse treatments are nothing less than forms of the old witchcraft which so worried our great-grandfathers, nothing more than the voodoo practices or conjure business that so affrights the poor Negro today. The principles are the same. The practice is the same, and the practitioners are the same at heart, black-hearted, black magicians, all of them, subject to the same inevitable fate which overtakes all such people, no matter how high their pretenses. The secret of charms, etc. The physical and material agencies used by the voodoo men and the witches of old, the wax images, the pith balls, and all the rest of the tomfoolery were nothing but agencies upon which the will of the practitioner could concentrate, and aid to concentrated will. Of course, besides, they served to terrify their victims by suggestion. I do not deny that material objects take up and absorb the magnetism of people, good and bad, for that is a well-established occult truth. And the efficacy of charms, sacred relics, etc., depends upon this fact, together with the aid of suggestion. But I do say that all the charms in the world, all the witchcraft and voodoo material agencies, can produce no other effect that is allowed them by the minds of the person sought to be affected. Faith and belief determines the degree of receptivity to such influences. How witchcraft operated. The prayer man of the Sandwich Islands prays people to death unless they buy him off. But it is the fear and belief on the part of the people that render his work effective. If they would say scat to him mentally by asserting their individuality as mentative centers, they would be absolutely immune. I need not recount the many instances of this kind of telementation for adverse purposes, for the pages of history are full of them, although the historians sneer at the whole subject, deeming it a myth, and laughing over the credulity of our forefathers. Withstanding the fact, the witches and conjurers went to the scaffold and stake, confessing their guilt. It is all very well to attribute to the imagination of the persons affected, but suppose they tell us a little about this strange imagination that produced such real effects upon people. The cause, many have been imaginary, but the effects were certainly very real. An example of adverse influence. I will relate but one instance, which will serve as a type of these forms of telementation. It is cited by an old German physician. He relates that he was consulted by a farmer who complained of being disturbed at night by strange noises, which sounded like someone striking iron. These noises occurred between the hours of 10 and 12 every night. The physician asked him if he had any enemy he suspected of thus influencing and annoying him. He replied that there was no one but an old village blacksmith, an old enemy, whose power he feared, and who lived several miles from the farmer. The physician bade him return the next day, and in the meantime visited the blacksmith, and asked him what he did between the hours of 10 and 12 at night, accompanying the question with a glance of a strong will and power. How the blacksmith collected his bill. The blacksmith, now somewhat frightened, replied, I hammer a bar of iron every night at that time, and all the while I think intently of a bad enemy of mine, who once cheated me out of some money, and I will at the same time that the noise shall disturb his rest. The physician ordered him to desist, and at the same time made the farmer pay over the money due to the blacksmith, and there was no more trouble. If you wish further instances of this sort, turn over the pages of any old book, which treats upon the witchcraft delusion, and denote the similarity. But one instance is enough to illustrate the matter. They are all cut out of the same cloth. You will note the two necessary elements present in every case, viz. Number 1, the use of the force by one person, and 2, the belief or fear or both on the part of the second person. Now you have the whole story. Good employment of the force. And also remember that I have told you, the same force that is used in such cases for evil purposes may also be used and is used for the most beneficial and worthy purposes, the treatments, for good things practiced by the practitioners of the various schools of mental science and other new thought people are along the lines of specialized telementation. People have been encouraged, helped, healed, reformed, and otherwise aided and benefited by telementation. Do not lose the recollection of the good in considering the bad. The good belongs to the phase of white magic, and its use can result only in good to the practitioner of it, whereas the black magician must reap the whirlwind of the wind that he has sown. These things come home to roost, always, according to their kind, and they bring their friends home with them. How schemes use the force. In addition to the selfish and evil use above mentioned, there is another selfish use of specialized telementation that is quite common of these late years. I allude to the use of mentative influence by telementation for the purpose of influencing people to fall in with the schemes and plans and enterprises of the mentator. The principle involved in the same as in all these treatments, good and bad, and the practice is the same. The mentator forms the mental image of the other person and then floods him with currents of desire force or willpower or both, at the same time earnestly willing and desiring that he will do as the mentator wishes him to do. The mentator usually uses his will to make the other do this in the mental picture, in imagination, thus forming a mental matrix, to which he then tries to make the other conform. This is a form of visualization, of which I shall speak presently. Of course, this practice, like any other of the kind, may be defeated by one asserting his individuality and will. I give you here a few rules to use on occasions when you think that someone is trying to so treat or influence you. Better study them carefully. Here they are. Valuable rules. Number 1. In the first place, steady your mind and calm your feelings. Then pause for a moment and say the words, I am, calmly and forcibly, at the same time forming a mental picture of yourself as a center of force and power in the great ocean of mind. See yourself as standing along and full of power. Then mentally form a picture of your aura, extending about a yard on all sides of you in an egg-shaped form. See that this aura is charged with your willpower, which is flowing outward, repelling any adverse mental suggestions that are being sent to you and causing them to fly back to the source from whence they came. A little practice will enable you to perfect this picture, which will greatly aid you in creating a strong positive aura of will, which will prove to be a magnetic armor and shield. A useful affirmation, the affirmation I am, is the strongest known to occult science, for it is a positive statement of actual being. You may use the following affirmation also if you please. It has helped many. I assert my individuality as a center of force, power, and being. Nothing can adversely affect me. My mind is my own, and I refuse admittance to unwelcome suggestions or influences. My desires are my own, and refuse to admit undesirable vibrations by induction or otherwise. My will is my own, and I charge it with power to beat off and repel all undesirable influences. I am surrounded by an aura of positive will which protects me absolutely. A useful denial. The following denial has proved of the greatest value to many. I deny to all or any the power to influence me against my best interests. I am my own master. These words may seem simple, but if you will use them, you will be surprised at their efficacy. You realize, of course, that it is the mental state aroused by the words that does the work, rather than any special virtue in the words themselves. Guard against impulses. Number 2, guard yourself from acting upon impulses. When you feel a sudden or unaccountable impulse to do this thing or that thing, stop and assert your positive individuality, and then drive out all outside influences by repeating the affirmations, etc., given above, and by creating the proper mental picture. Then, when you have recovered your balance, consider the impulse and decide whether it is to your best interests or otherwise. You will be able to see this clearly by reason of your mental house cleaning a moment before. Then, if the impulse seems to be against your best interests, drive it from you, saying, I drive you away from me. You do not belong to me. Return to those who sent you, or other words to that effect. This may be rendered more forceful if you will but create a mental picture of the discarded idea flying away from you in the shape of a tiny thought wave. These mental pictures aid one very materially in such matters, but in the sending forth of an idea as well as in the discarding of one. The positive aura, number 3. Cultivate the picture and idea of a positive aura, and always think of yourself as being encased in such a one. See yourself as a strong positive I, a center of power, encased in an impregnable sheath of auric force. You will thus be able to build up yourself into a mighty center. You'll be surprised at the confused manner of people who try to influence you when they come in contact with this aura and find their suggestions and mentative currents being cast back upon themselves. Such people find themselves all broken up when they meet a condition like this, which they do not understand, for very few of them are practical occultists. The mental picture of yourself as a center of power, surrounded with a positive aura, will, if persisted in, render you extremely positive, so that your influence is sure to be felt by the world with which you come in contact. Amusing sequels. You will often be amused by occurrences following after the rejection of these stray impulses, etc. You will find that if you have had an impulse to buy a certain thing or sell a certain thing at a sacrifice, that in a day or so, perhaps an hour or so, you will be approached by some person who will advise you personally to do that same thing, the person being likely to be benefited by the scheme or plan. I do not mean that such person has necessarily tried to influence you by mentative currents, for he may not have consciously done so, but nevertheless, that is just what has happened, and his desire or will has caused these currents to flow in your direction, and you have felt them. Now that your eyes have been opened to this fact, you will be amused and surprised to see how many corroborative proofs you will receive. But I always assert your individuality as a center of power, and will be well with you in these matters. Conscious and unconscious use. In passing on to the other phases of telementation, I would again remind you that in the instances of specialized telementation, the force has been used both consciously or unconsciously. Those who know the laws of the use of the force may direct these telementative currents direct to those whom they wish to influence, just as they may consciously give mental suggestions in a personal interview. But even when these laws are not understood, the currents or the suggestions are sent forth by the strong desire or will animating the person. Of course, the person who understands the subject will be able to direct his force with greater precision and effect, but in any event, the effect is produced in the same way. Generalized telementation. We now pass on to a consideration of the second class of telementation, which we call generalized telementation, or the use of the force with a general purpose of effecting the desired result, without special attention to any particular person or persons. This form of manifestation of telementation may be grouped into two subclasses, viz. A, in which the general desire or will of the individual to attain certain results manifests itself in personal interviews and induces mental states in those with whom he comes in contact, and B, in cases where the general desire and will manifest in telementative currents or waves or whirlpools affecting all persons and things who are interested in any way in the enterprise, scheme, plan, or undertaking of the individual, and tending to cause them to fall into line and obey the will or comply with the desires of the general plan of the individual. How strong positive men use the force. The last form of telementative influence is far more common than one would suppose. Strong positive men start into motion waves and currents that sweep over the country, gathering force with each added impetus, and using the principle of mental contagion to increase its influence. Great leaders of men are centers of these mentative whirlpools and similar forms of mentative influence, and draw in or suck in to themselves persons, things, and objects conducive to their plans and ambitions. They do not have it all their own way, of course, for there are many influences at work which tend to neutralize their efforts. Other men have conflicting schemes which interfere and often destroy the influence of these great mentators. And then people are becoming educated regarding the nature of the forces they employ and will not accept their suggestions or allow their vibrations to influence them. Still, the force is still used to great effect by many politicians and other persons who reach out for large numbers of people. Generals of business and what they do. Leading generals of business also make use of the force in this manner and draw things their way. In fact, nearly everybody who does business with people scattered over a large territory employs this force more or less, generally unconsciously. And many of these uses work no harm upon those affected, because many of these people are engaged in legitimate enterprises and want always to give a square deal and a good dollar's worth. I am not holding up this manifestation of telementation as reprehensible. I am merely stating its general laws and forms of manifestation. How to repel the waves. One may repel these mentative waves in the same way and by the same methods mentioned a few pages back in reference to the repelling of specialized telementation. The rule is the same in both cases, for the principle involved is the same. Justifiable use of the force. Before leaving this branch of the subject, I would remind you that one may take advantage of the last mentioned form of telementation to his own good in a perfectly proper and justifiable way. One may wish to gain certain information and knowledge about certain subjects. If so, if he will hold a strong desire that the desired knowledge will come to his notice and attention, and will at the same time will that the mentative current flow forth in such of persons, things, and objects capable of imparting the knowledge or information, he will get results. He will find that after a while he will run across people who will be glad to give him the information he wants, or he will pick up a book that will either tell him what he wants or else will refer to some other book or subject that will point out the path to him. These instances are quite common and afford wonderful proofs of the law herein stated. In this way, no one is harmed and mutual benefits are obtained. People are attracted to each other in this way, and each finds his own. The law of attraction. The above manifestation results from the operation of what has been called the law of attraction, by the workings of which each person is continually drawing to himself the people, things, objects, and even circumstances in harmony and accord with his prevailing mental states. Like attracts like, and the mental states determine that which one draws to himself. If you are not satisfied with what is coming to you, start to work and change your mental attitudes and mental states, and you will see a change gradually setting in, and things that you want will begin to come your way. This law of attraction has been much written about in works on mental science during the past 10 years. So it is not necessary for me to go into details about it here. I've given you the general law and rules in this lesson, and you may apply it accordingly. Like attracts like. A most important fact about the effect of mentative vibrations upon people lies in the principle that one is more affected by vibrations in harmony with their own accustomed feelings and mental states than by those of opposite natures. A man who is full of evil schemes and selfish aims is more apt to be caught up by similar vibrations than the one who lives above that plane of thought. He is more easily tempted by evil suggestions and influences than one to whom these things are abhorrent. And the same is true on every plane. Illustrations of this law. A man whose mental attitude is one of confidence and fearlessness is not apt to be affected by vibrations of a negative, pessimistic, gloomy nature, and vice versa. Therefore, if you wish to receive the vibrations of the thoughts and feelings of others, you must place yourself in a mental attitude corresponding with those vibrations you wish to receive. And if you wish to avoid vibrations of a certain kind, the best way is to rise above them in your own mind and to cultivate mental states opposite to them. The positive always beats off the negative, and optimistic mental states are always positive, pessimistic mental states. The sense of individuality in one's relation to the universal mind is the strongest and most positive mental state one can attain. Therefore, cultivate it first, last, and all the time. The key of telementation. I now come to a phrase of the subject that underlies all the phenomena of telementation and really gives the key to much of its wonderful effects. I allude to what occultists know as mental visualization, or visualization for short. This visualization is to telementation what the pattern is to the maker of objects, what the plans of the architect are to the builders, and what the mold or matrix is to the casters of forms. It is the skeleton around which the materialization of thought forms occurs. It is of the greatest importance for you to acquaint yourselves with its laws and effects. Visualization. To visualize means to see mentally. That is, to form a mental image of a thing, to see it in one's mind, etc. Visualization along the lines of one's daily occupation is a most important thing, but one that is very poorly appreciated because little understood. The best workmen, writers, inventors, composers, etc., are those who are able to see the thing in the mind and then reproduce it in materialized form. Sir Francis Galton, one of the best authorities upon the subject, has said, "Free action of a vivid visualizing faculty is of much importance in connection with the higher processes of generalized thought. A visual image is the most perfect form of mental representation whenever the shape, position, and relations of objects to space are concerned. The best workmen are those who visualize the whole of what they propose to do, because they take a tool in their hands. Strategists, artists of all denominations, physicists who contrive new experiments, and in short, all who do not follow routine have need of it. A faculty that is of importance in all technical and artistic occupations. That gives accuracy to our perceptions and justice to our generalizations. Is starved by lazy disuse, instead of being cultivated judiciously in such a way as will, on the whole, bring the best return. I believe that a serious study of the best means of developing and utilizing this faculty, without prejudice to the practice of abstract thoughts and symbols, is one of the many pressing desiderata in the yet unformed science of education. Visualization and telementation. And all that Sir Francis Galton has said above is equally true of the cultivation of the art of visualization in connection with telementation. The trouble with the majority of people is that they do not know just what they do want. They are not able to form clear mental images of that which they wish to create or materialize. the men who obtain the greatest and most wonderful results through mentative influence, particularly in the form of telementation, are those men who are able to visualize most clearly the things they wish to materialize, who are able to form the mental image of the things they wish to manifest. The secret of visualization. The secret of visualization lies in the occult and psychological principle that as is the mental matrix, so is the mental form. And as is the mental form, so is the physical materialization. In other words, the visualized mental image is the matrix or mold into which the mentative energy is poured and from which it takes form. And the form of the mentative energy, so treated, is what we have called the mental image. And around this mental image, the deposit of materialization forms, and thus does the idea become real. In a nutshell, if you wish to get the best effects from mentative energy, you must create a mental image around which the material or physical materialization is formed. And the way to form the proper mental image is by visualization, which thus builds up the matrix or mold into which the mentative energy pours, crystallizes, and creates the mental image. And as is the matrix, so is the image. And as is the image, so is the materialization. Please read over this statement a number of times until it is perfectly clear to you, for upon your understanding of it depends your understanding of the laws of materialization, of ideas, of mental images by means of telementative processes. What is necessary? Before you can draw to the material needed for building up the things or conditions you desire, you must form a clear mental image of just what you want to materialize. And before you can make this mental image, you must realize mentally just exactly what you do desire. And the process of this is called visualization. That is, you build up a mental matrix or mold little by little, until you have it before you clearly. Then you pour into it the mentative energy of desire and will, until it stands out clearly formed as a mental image, just as you would see it if it were actually materialized. Then you must hold this mental image before you constantly, regarding it not as a mere image, but as something real, which you have created in your mind, and which will proceed to surround itself with the material necessary to give it material objectivity or materialization. The first steps. If you cannot see the whole thing at first, as a mental image, that is, if you are not able to build up a complete matrix by visualization, then do the next best thing, which is the very best thing for the majority of people, and build a matrix of the first step toward the whole thing, that is, the first thing that is needed. Then concentrate upon this first thing until the mental image stands out sharp and clear, and you will find that things have been started into motion. Then, as you add little by little to your matrix and build up your mental image a little larger, greater detail, and so on and on. An important rule, and here's an important thing. You must mentally see the thing as actually existing right now and not as going to exist later on. You must realize that the mental image exists right now, else it will lack clearness and effectiveness. The next steps. Then you must pour into that mental image a constant supply of strong, positive mental energy, desire force, and willpower, all of which will spread out in the proper directions and affect the material needed to materialize your mental image. By so doing, you impart to the mentative currents the necessary impetus and direction, and they will operate along these lines and will proceed to materialize your mental image for you. Things will come your way. People will appear who are necessary to your plans. Information will come to you from strange sources and in unexpected times and places. Opportunities will open themselves up to you. But remember this, that you must be prepared to act upon these openings and opportunities. You must be alert and watchful and expectant. You will have to do the work. Remember? Yourself. Although the forces you have started into operation will supply you with the material. The door will be open to you, but you must step in yourself. The tools and materials will be provided for you, but you must use them. The information will be laid out before you, but you must make it your own. Even mental magic will not avail the lazy man. You must learn to do things yourself. The working principles. This subject of visualization will fill a book by itself, but I hope that I have been able to give you a clear idea of its working principles. Remember always this rule, this triple key of attainment, as I have often called it. Number 1, you must desire a thing most intensely. Number 2, then you must earnestly expect it. Number 3, then you must use your will in the direction of action, tending to bring it about. But first of all, as I have said, you must know just what you do want, and then proceed to create the mental matrix or mold by visualization. That is, you must proceed to mentally see it as already existing. In the above statement, there is enough occult information to fill a series of books, boiled down and concentrated. Concluding advice. And now, friends, I must bring this long lesson to a close. It must be read and studied in connection with the lessons preceding it, for they blend into each other and the information laps. I have given you certain occult teachings in plain, practical form, which may seem so simple to you as to be passed over without the proper consideration and examination. Do not make this mistake, I pray you. Do not hanker after high-sounding terms and mystical verbiage. The truth is capable of being expressed without these fancy trappings or drapery. I have tried to tell you the how of these things, but you must study carefully in order to grasp every point. I have boiled down and condensed a great deal of information into this lesson. Be sure that you do not let any of it get away from you. You cannot expect to acquaint yourself fully with the subject in one hasty reading. You must read and reread many times with careful study and thought. You must do some thinking on your own account in order to apply these general principles to your own symptoms and needs. If you will read carefully and then think a little, there is no royal road to mental magic or anything else. I have tried to make the road a little easier for you, but you must do the traveling yourself. You cannot reach the heights by proxy. You must digest these things yourself. Pre-digested ideas will do you no good. The simple underlying principle. And now, in conclusion, look once more at the magic mental picture in which you have seen all of these things in operation. You will see that underlying all these wonderful manifestations of telementation, there is just the simple principle that I have pointed out to you, induction of mental states by desire, force, and willpower. Everything occurs by reason of this principle. You may think the book that you needed and which came to you so wonderfully must have arrived in some other way. Not so. The book was placed here and moved there by people, and these people have minds capable of being moved by vibratory waves. And so when once the thing was set into operation, all things work together toward the given end. These lessons reached you under the law of attraction. There is no chance in these matters. There are laws in operation everywhere and always, and over all, there is the great law of the universal. And now, in concluding this lesson, I would remind you to always realize that you are centers of living mental energy in the great ocean of mentative energy, and that you are strong in the degree that you are positive, and that you are positive in the degree that you are an individual. And you are an individual in the degree that you realize that you are a center of living will. There is nothing to fear but fear. You are capable of asserting your individuality always and everywhere. Your only chains are those you forge for yourself. You are free right now, here, and always. Do not be deluded by the petty things of personality that pass away and perish overnight, but rest serene and firm in the consciousness that you are an individual, living will center. And fear not to assert the individual I. There is no devil but fear. Nothing but fear can keep you from your own heritage and birthright. Assert the I and banish fear.